Good evening, night owls, and welcome to Whisper Crowley. Tonight, I will guide you into a world of darkness, hoping to help you relax and unwind. Perhaps some of you will even drift into a haunting yet soothing sleep. Before we begin, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. And now we begin. It started with a message. A single voice, distorted, barely intelligible, yet chilling to the core. "They're coming for you," the voice said. And then nothing. A long silence. I stared at my phone, my heart racing. I listened to it again, but the words felt heavier the second time. "They're coming for you." I could feel the cold sweat on the back of my neck as the reality of it began to sink in. I didn't know who had sent it. No name, no number. Just the message. The voice sounded strange. It was as if the speaker was trying to warn me, or perhaps it was taunting me. Either way, something about it felt wrong. I tried to shake it off, telling myself that it was just some sick prank. But deep down, I couldn't dismiss the unsettling feeling that had settled in my chest. There was a heaviness in the air, something I couldn't quite describe, but it was there, pressing down on me. I looked around my apartment, trying to find something familiar, something reassuring. But all I saw was the same old, cluttered mess of books, papers, and half-empty coffee mugs. The apartment was silent. Too silent. I turned the volume down on my phone, half expecting another message to pop up, but nothing came. I felt a strange sensation on the back of my neck, as if someone was standing just behind me, watching. I spun around quickly, but there was no one there. The silence stretched on, thick and suffocating. The feeling didn't go away, though. I couldn't shake the unease crawling through my veins. I sat back on the couch, trying to breathe normally. But my mind wouldn't let it go. I kept replaying the voice in my head, the way it lingered, the way it sent a chill through me. What did it mean? Who was they? And why me? I shook my head. It had to be a prank. But as the minutes dragged on, I couldn't escape the thought that maybe, just maybe, there was something more to it. Something I wasn't seeing. I looked at the message again, the words flashing across the screen. "They're coming for you." My hands shook as I pressed the reply button. What was I supposed to say? I had no answers, no clues. Whoever was behind this wanted me to be afraid. And I was. I tried to call the number, but it was unreachable. Of course it was. It was likely a burner number, one that would disappear as soon as the message was sent. I ran a quick search on the internet, hoping to find something that could explain what was happening. But nothing came up. No similar stories. No news articles. No warnings. Nothing. The voice, the message. It didn't make sense. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I thought of all the possibilities. An ex-girlfriend with a twisted sense of humor, a prank by a coworker who thought it'd be funny. But the message didn't feel like that. It didn't feel like a joke. It felt personal. I tried to calm myself down. There was no reason to panic. It was just a message, right? But as I stood up to get a drink, I heard it. A faint sound, barely audible over the hum of the refrigerator. A shuffle like someone moving through the hallway outside my apartment. I froze, listening. The sound stopped. I strained my ears. Maybe it was the wind, maybe it was just the building settling. But then the shuffle came again. Closer this time. I could hear it more clearly. I stepped toward the door, my heart pounding in my chest. Was someone outside? Or was it my imagination? I opened the door cautiously, peering into the dimly lit hallway. But it was empty. The hallway was silent still. No one was there. I closed the door slowly, my mind racing. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I had to find out who had sent that message. I couldn't just ignore it. I grabbed my jacket, stuffing my phone in the pocket. I was going to get some answers. But as I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the ground floor, I heard it again. This time it wasn't a shuffle. It was a voice. A whisper, soft and clear, as though it was coming from right behind me. Don't go. I turned around quickly, but there was no one there. Just the empty elevator, the dim lights flickering overhead. I pressed myself against the wall of the elevator, my mind spinning. Was I losing my mind? Or was this something else? The doors opened and I stepped out into the lobby of my building. The air felt heavier now, more oppressive. My skin tingled and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I walked quickly through the lobby, glancing over my shoulder at the empty space behind me. Outside, the world was bustling as usual. People walked by without a care, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The city felt too big, too crowded. Like I was the only one aware of the darkness creeping closer. I needed answers. I needed to find out who was behind this. But as I made my way down the street, I felt the weight of a presence behind me, like a shadow, following my every step. My heartbeat quickened, and I could almost hear the whispers again, faint but undeniable. And then, as if on cue, my phone vibrated in my pocket. Another message. This time the words were simple. You can't hide. I stopped in my tracks, staring at the screen. My breath caught in my throat. What did this mean? Who was watching me? The silence around me grew thicker, and the world seemed to close in. The words on my phone screen burned into my mind. You can't hide. I stood frozen in place, surrounded by the sound of the busy city, but I felt like I was in a vacuum. People brushed past me, oblivious to my internal chaos, yet I couldn't shake the sense that I was being watched. That something was closing in. My fingers trembled as I stared at the message, my breath shallow and fast. Who was sending this? Why? I turned to look around, searching the crowded street for any hint of an answer. But the faces around me were strangers, none of them seeming to take any notice of me. I shoved the phone back into my pocket, trying to steady my racing heart. This wasn't real, I kept telling myself. Well, it couldn't be. But with each passing second, that feeling, heavy, suffocating, only grew stronger. I didn't know how much longer I could ignore it. The sense of being watched was suffocating. Every shadow seemed to linger too long. Every car that passed by seemed to slow as if it were scouting me. But when I turned, no one was there. Just the usual passers-by, walking in their own worlds, unaware of the storm brewing inside mine. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. I called my best friend, Jake. He'd always been the more level-headed one, the one who knew how to handle my spiraling thoughts when things got out of hand. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Then his voicemail clicked on. I cursed it under my breath and left a message. Hey Jake, it's me. Call me back when you can. It's urgent. I didn't wait for him to call back. I couldn't. The sense of urgency was suffocating. I had to find out who was behind this, or I might lose my mind trying. I walked to the nearest cafe, hoping that the steady noise of the coffee machines and the hum of conversation might ground me. But as soon as I entered, the uneasy feeling only deepened. I could hear the buzz of the fluorescent lights above, the clink of cups being set down on the counter, but all of it felt distant. Out of place. The door swung open behind me, and I heard a sharp gasp. I spun around, my heart skipping a beat. A woman stood in the doorway, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. She looked as if she had seen a ghost. For a split second, our gazes locked. Her mouth moved, but no sound came out. Then, just as quickly as she had appeared, she turned and rushed out of the cafe. I blinked, too stunned to react at first. Was she in trouble? Had something happened to her? I glanced around the room, searching for any sign that something was amiss. But the cafe was still bustling, with people oblivious to what had just occurred. I felt a chill crawl down my spine, my instincts screaming that something wasn't right. Was this somehow connected to the voice? The messages. Was this woman trying to warn me, too? I didn't waste any more time. I paid for my coffee and rushed out of the cafe, back onto the street. The air felt colder now, a sharp bite in the wind. I needed to find Jake. He'd be able to help me make sense of all this. But first I had to check the time. I pulled my phone from my pocket, half expecting another cryptic message. And sure enough, there it was. It's already too late. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I gripped the phone tighter, trying to steady my breath. Too late for what? The world around me seemed to shift. The noises from the street faded, replaced by a low, almost imperceptible hum that seemed to come from within me. My surroundings began to blur, the lines of reality bending. I felt as though the ground beneath me was shifting, pulling me into something darker, something far more sinister. I stumbled, my feet unsteady, and almost collided with a street lamp. I stopped myself just in time, but the dizziness didn't go away. In fact, it grew stronger. The hum in my ears intensified, growing into a buzzing sound. I pressed my hand to my temple, trying to calm myself. I needed to focus. I looked around frantically for any sign of Jake, but the street was empty now. Where had everyone gone? I checked my phone again. No calls, no messages from Jake. Suddenly a loud thump echoed from behind me. I spun around, my heart racing. A figure stood just beyond the corner, tall and cloaked in shadows, barely visible in the dim light of the street. I couldn't make out their face, but the silhouette was unmistakable. They were watching me. I stepped back, instinctively reaching for my phone. The buzzing in my ears grew louder, more insistent. I looked down at the screen again, but this time, the message wasn't just a string of words. It was a picture, a grainy image of myself. I felt my stomach drop as I recognized the background. It was the alley near my apartment, the one I walked through every day. But there was something else in the photo. Something moving. A shadow. I had to get out of there. I turned quickly, my heart pounding, and ran down the street, away from the alley, away from the figure in the shadows. The buzzing in my ears was deafening now, and I could barely hear the sounds of the city over the pounding in my chest. I ran for what felt like hours, but when I finally slowed down and looked around, I realized I had no idea where I was. The streets were unfamiliar. The buildings different. I was lost, and I had no idea how to find my way back. The hum in my ears stopped, replaced by the eerie silence of the empty street. Something was wrong. I glanced at my phone one more time. It was the same picture again. But this time the shadow was closer. It was getting closer. And then the voice came again. Soft, whispered, "You can't run from us." I froze, the phone slipping from my hand and hitting the pavement with a sickening crack. The phone lay on the ground, cracked and useless. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, my body frozen, heart hammering in my chest. The voice, "You can't run from us," echoed in my head, too loud to ignore, yet faint enough to make me question whether I had imagined it. But I knew I hadn't. The air felt thick, almost suffocating. My breath was shallow, every inhale a struggle against an invisible pressure pressing down on me. I glanced around frantically, trying to gather my bearings, but nothing looked familiar. The street was silent, empty. A strange emptiness filled the space, like the world had turned upside down while I wasn't looking. I felt a presence, a weight in the air that was impossible to ignore. It wasn't just the voice, it was something deeper. Something unnatural. A low scraping sound pierced the silence, distant at first but growing louder, coming closer. My body tensed. No, 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 I told myself. I had to move. I had to leave. My legs felt like they were made of stone, unwilling to respond to my frantic thoughts. Slowly, almost mechanically, I bent down and retrieved my broken phone. The screen flickered as I held it in my hand, the shattered glass a reminder of how quickly things had spiraled out of control. I glanced at the cracked display and my heart skipped a beat. Another message. This one wasn't just words. It's already too late. I didn't have time to process it. The scraping sound came again, closer this time, followed by a faint clicking, like the sound of something dragging across concrete, something heavy and deliberate. My mind screamed for me to run, but my legs refused to obey. The buzzing in my head intensified, drowning out everything but the thumping of my own pulse. And then I saw it. A shadow low to the ground, moving toward me with an unsettling speed. It was darker than the surrounding night, more solid, more real. I couldn't see its shape clearly, but I could feel it closing in. The air grew colder, like a gust of wind had passed through, but it didn't move the leaves or stir the dust. It simply chilled everything it touched. I turned on my heel and ran, forcing my legs to work despite the weight in the air, despite the panic suffocating me. Each step felt like I was running in quicksand, my body screaming to stop, to rest, but I couldn't. I wouldn't. The scraping sound grew louder, now accompanied by the unmistakable sound of breathing. Labored, wet, gasping. I pushed myself harder, faster, until I rounded a corner and stumbled into a narrow alley. It was dimly lit, but it felt safer, like I could disappear into the shadows. I pressed my back against the cold brick wall, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The alley was silent for a moment. Too silent. And then the whispering started again. You can't hide. I clutched my phone tighter, my knuckles turning white, my head spinning. I tried to listen for any sign of movement, but the world was a blur of shadows. The buzzing in my head refused to stop, a constant, maddening hum. Suddenly I heard it. A footstep, heavy, slow. I froze. The scrape of shoes against gravel. The footsteps stopped, just a few feet from where I was hiding. My heart thudded painfully in my chest, the sound deafening in the stillness of the alley. Every instinct told me to move, to run, but my body refused to listen. I couldn't bring myself to look. I couldn't see what was lurking in the dark. But I could feel it. Something cold. Something wrong. And then I heard it again, the faint scratching sound. But this time it was closer. Almost directly behind me. How could I not hear it? I turned slowly, forcing my neck to obey, even as my body screamed at me to look away. My eyes darted to the corner, to the edge of the alley, but it was empty. Nothing there. But the feeling didn't go away. It pressed in on me, the silence too oppressive. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't move. I needed to leave. No, but as I turned to sprint down the alley, my phone buzzed again. A new message. We know what you did. My throat went dry. What did that even mean? What had I done? The buzzing in my head turned to a loud, shrill whine, blocking out everything but the deafening sound of my heartbeat. And then crash, I was thrown to the ground. My head hit the cold concrete with a sickening crack. Stars exploded behind my eyes as I tried to push myself up, but something was holding me down. Something strong. A weight settled over me, pinning me to the ground, and I could feel its cold presence press into my chest. A low growl rumbled through the air, vibrating my bones. My body refused to obey, every muscle locked in place, my mind screaming, but my body refusing to move. I gasped for breath, unable to inhale the air that had suddenly turned thick and heavy. My chest burned. The pressure on my ribs was unbearable. And then I felt it. A breath icy, sharp on the back of my neck. It was right there. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The growl grew louder, closer, and I knew then that whatever this was, whatever had been following me, it was about to make its move. I wasn't alone anymore. The growl rumbled again, closer now, reverberating through my chest like a warning. I could feel its hot, ragged breath on my neck, each exhale a sharp, painful reminder of the thing that hovered just inches away from me. Panic exploded inside my chest, flooding every nerve. I was paralyzed, trapped beneath the weight of whatever this was. My vision swam, the world spinning around me in a blur of shadows. I tried to focus, to make sense of what was happening, but the more I tried, the less I understood. The alley was silent, but the hum in my ears, a strange, high-pitched noise, grew louder, consuming everything. I could hear my own heartbeat, a frantic pounding in my head that drowned out all else. The breath on my neck intensified, as if whatever was hovering over me was waiting for the perfect moment to strike. My body shook with terror, but I couldn't move. My legs refused to work, my arms frozen at my sides. The sense of helplessness was suffocating. Then the growl stopped. For a long moment there was only silence. No scraping sounds, no breathing, just the pounding of my heart in my ears. I dared not move, scared that even the slightest shift would trigger whatever was waiting. I held my breath, hoping that if I stayed completely still, I could somehow escape whatever was happening. But the silence was too heavy. It was like the world was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. And then snap. A branch. Or was it a twig? Something snapped in the distance, and I flinched, my whole body jerking in response. The creature, it was still there. I knew it, but it hadn't attacked yet. I felt a pressure on my chest, like fingers digging into my ribs, squeezing the air out of my lungs. I couldn't breathe. My vision started to fade at the edges, my body trembling with the strain of trying to hold on to consciousness. In the darkness, I heard it again, soft, almost tender, like a whisper, "We know you're still here." I forced my eyes open, my vision blurry, fighting to stay awake. The words were too clear, too real. They made my skin crawl, twisting inside me, igniting a cold terror I had never known. With a desperate surge of energy, I twisted my body, trying to break free from the weight pressing down on me. But it was no use. My movements were slow, sluggish, as though something was anchoring me to the ground. My heart thundered in my chest, each beat echoing through my skull. The pressure on my chest intensified, like the creature was getting closer, pressing harder, suffocating me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. A flash of light, a sharp, blinding flare, suddenly pierced the darkness. It was too bright, too sharp. I squeezed my eyes shut against the sudden pain, but it didn't stop. The light was everywhere, filling my head with a burning glow. The growl faded, replaced by a soft, steady hum, like a distant, low-frequency vibration. The light flickered, and for a moment I thought I saw something. Just a shadow, barely perceptible. But it was enough to make my blood run cold. Was it still here? The light died down, leaving only the hum behind, and I slowly opened my eyes again. The alley was no longer dark. It wasn't bright either, but there was something different about the air. Something thick, heavy, and then I saw it. The shadow. It was moving, shifting, undulating in the air like smoke, a dark figure that swirled and writhed with an unnatural fluidity. The outline was vague, constantly changing, like it was never the same thing for long. But I knew what it was. The creature was still here. It hadn't left. I blinked rapidly, trying to clear my vision. The shadow didn't seem to get any clearer, no matter how hard I tried. But one thing became unmistakably clear. It was watching me. Its presence was suffocating, hanging in the air like a thick fog. I couldn't look away, couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The shadow didn't move closer. It didn't need to. It was already inside my head. And then the voice returned. You've been chosen. The words slipped through my mind like ice-cold fingers clawing at my thoughts. I tried to scream, but the sound caught in my throat, strangled by the overwhelming pressure. I was trapped, and this thing, whatever it was, had control. I could feel its cold presence seep into my skin, into my bones, invading every corner of my body, like it was pulling me into itself. A part of me wanted to fight back to escape, but the other part, my mind, my soul, was already fading, lost in the depths of its pull. The whispering continued, softer now, but no less terrifying. You're not alone. And for the first time, I understood. The darkness, the creature, the shadow, it wasn't just following me. It was connected to me somehow. It had been there all along, lurking in the corners of my life, waiting for this moment. Waiting for me to be ready. Ready for what? I didn't have time to question it. The shadow swelled, growing bigger, its form twisting and stretching like it was hungry, expanding with every breath I took. I wanted to run, to scream, to fight, but I couldn't. The world blurred again, my vision spinning as the shadow swallowed me whole. And then darkness. The hum in my ears stopped, the buzzing fading into nothing. Silent, but it wasn't peace. It was worse than before. It was as if time had stopped altogether. The void stretched out around me, infinite, oppressive. And I was still here. Still trapped. Still alive. But was I? The voice came once more, softer now, like a distant memory. You are ours. I couldn't run. I couldn't hide. There was no escape. And then nothing. I don't know how much time passed. The absence of sound makes it hard to track. The darkness pressed in on me, thick and oppressive, but it wasn't just the darkness, it was the emptiness. Like everything around me had been erased, leaving only a void. At first, I thought I might be dead. After everything, the growls, the shadow, the voice, I'd expected it to be the end. A final moment where everything collapsed into nothing. But somehow I wasn't sure anymore. I wasn't sure of anything. I moved cautiously at first, testing the space around me. It was strange, my limbs felt heavier, as if they didn't belong to me anymore. There was no pain, no sharp discomfort, just a deep, gnawing wrongness. I tried to speak. No sound came. I tried again. Nothing. In that moment, the fear was overwhelming. Not the fear of the unknown, but the fear of being alone in it. No voice to guide me, no light to guide me, just the crushing silence. Was this some kind of purgatory? A nightmare I couldn't escape? Or had I truly crossed over into another reality? Then I heard it. A soft scraping sound. Barely noticeable at first, like the shuffle of feet on gravel. But it was there. I wasn't imagining it. I tensed, every muscle in my body going rigid. Was it the thing, the shadow, or something else entirely? I tried to look around, but it was useless. The blackness was absolute. I could see nothing, hear nothing but that single, creeping sound. And then the voice. You shouldn't have come. It wasn't a whisper this time. It was clearer, sharper, and it cut through the silence like a knife. My heart skipped, a cold shiver running down my spine. This voice, it wasn't just a sound. It was present. It was power. And it was directed at me. My breath caught in my throat as I felt a sudden, intense pressure in the air around me. It was as if the atmosphere itself had thickened, suffocating me with a weight that made it impossible to breathe. It was a physical sensation, like invisible hands wrapping around my chest, squeezing the life out of me. I had to fight it. I had to break free. But my limbs wouldn't obey. My body felt like it was stuck in place, held by some unseen force. "Why did you come here?" the voice demanded, this time not with anger, but with a strange, twisted curiosity. "Why did you seek the truth?" I felt something shift in the air, like the pressure was slowly being released, just enough to let me breathe again. I gasped, trying to fill my lungs, but the air was thin, tainted with something rancid, something metallic. I thought about running, but it felt pointless. What could I run from in a place like this? Was there even a place to run to? The shadow had taken it all, everything that had once been real, leaving only this empty, endless void behind. I wasn't sure where I was anymore, but I was sure that whatever had brought me here, whatever had me trapped, was more than just a nightmare. It was alive. It had purpose. I opened my mouth again, though I still couldn't make a sound. I could feel the desperation rising in me, like a tidal wave crashing against the walls of my chest. The voice answered for me. "Do you think you can escape it? You cannot. You are already ours." The words wrapped around me, suffocating me with their meaning. The weight of them settled into my bones, and for the first time, I realized that this wasn't just some entity I was dealing with. This was a force, a thing that existed, not just in the shadows, but in the very fabric of reality itself. It had power, and it was controlling me. The silence returned, but it wasn't peaceful. It was expectant. I could feel its presence all around me, just beyond my reach. Watching, waiting. Then suddenly something shifted in the dark. A flicker, a sliver of light. I froze, straining my eyes to see it, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. I blinked, my heart racing, wondering if I had imagined it. But then it came again. A small, distant glimmer in the void. I took a step forward, my feet moving without thinking. It wasn't much of a step, more of a shuffle, but it was the first movement I'd managed since I'd entered this oppressive darkness. And that glimmer of light, no matter how small, felt like the only hope I had left. I walked toward it, each step slower than the last, feeling the ground beneath me shift, soft and uneven. There was a distant sound now, like a crackling fire, faint but real. It grew louder as I moved forward, growing more distinct, more tangible. The air around me began to feel heavier again, but this time it was different. This time it wasn't the suffocating pressure from before. It was something else, something more. The light. The darkness pressed in on me from all sides, but there was now a sense of direction. The light ahead was guiding me, and I was desperate to reach it. I took another step, and then another. The light grew gradually at first, then all at once, it burst forward, illuminating everything. I stumbled back, raising my arm to shield my eyes from the sudden glare. But as my eyes adjusted, I saw it. It was a door. An ordinary wooden door, framed in soft, pale light. For a moment I just stood there, staring at it, trying to understand. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. It didn't belong here in this place. But somehow it did. You can't leave, the voice said, its tone almost pitying. There's nowhere to go. But I didn't care. I didn't listen. The door was my only way out. And I wasn't going to let it slip away. I reached for the handle. It was cold to the touch, and as I twisted it, the door creaked open. And then everything went black. I hope you enjoyed the first story. If you did, don't forget to leave a like, but if I didn't do my job well, feel free to give it a thumbs down. Either way, drop a comment and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, let's continue. I had never felt truly alone before. There was always something, someone around me. My family, friends, the occasional stranger at the coffee shop, the hum of the city. It wasn't the kind of loneliness that cut through you like a blade. It was the kind that snuck in quietly, hiding in the edges of the noise, waiting for a moment of silence to swallow you whole. But now the loneliness felt different. It wasn't a quiet absence, it was a presence. A presence that had started to creep into my life without warning. It began with a phone call. No, not a call. A voicemail. I didn't recognize the number. At first I thought it might be a wrong number, but the message was unsettling. You're being watched. The voice was deep with an almost mocking tone, but cold. So cold. My breath caught in my throat when I heard those words, and an involuntary shiver ran through my body. The hairs on my neck stood up. I replayed the message, wondering if I had misheard it. No, the words were clear. You're being watched. I tried to shake it off. Maybe it was a prank or some kind of glitch. But the weight of those words clung to me, settling in the pit of my stomach like a rock. I didn't tell anyone about it. Not at first. I didn't want to seem paranoid. I didn't want to seem crazy. But then the little things started happening. The kind of things that make you question if you're really losing your mind. It started with the feeling that someone was watching me. I'd catch glimmers of movement in the corner of my eye, shadows shifting in places where there should have been no shadows at all. I'd turn quickly, heart pounding, only to find nothing there. The moments would pass, but the feeling would linger. And then the phone calls. Not voicemails this time, actual calls. Every day, sometimes twice a day. Every time the same voice, the same words, you're being watched. It wasn't just the voice. There was something in the tone, something in the way it seemed to know everything. The name of the street I lived on. My favorite cafe. The route I took to work. It knew more about my life than it had any right to. And with each call, the sense of dread grew. It was like I was being pulled into a game that I hadn't agreed to play. One night I went for a walk after work. It was late, around midnight. The streets were mostly empty, the dim glow of the streetlights casting long shadows on the sidewalk. I walked briskly, hoping the cold air would shake off the tension I was feeling. But I couldn't ignore it anymore. The footsteps. I first noticed them when I turned a corner. At first it was subtle, faint, distant. but they were there. The sound of shoes on pavement, too close to be a coincidence. I quickened my pace, but the footsteps kept in time with mine, never speeding up, never slowing down. I looked over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone. But no one was there. Just the empty street. I thought maybe I was just imagining it, my nerves getting the best of me. But the footsteps didn't stop. They were still there, echoing through the night air. I felt my pulse quicken. It wasn't just the footsteps now. It was everything. The whole world felt too quiet, too still. The air seemed thick, pressing against my skin, suffocating. It was as if the world was holding its breath, waiting. I took another step. And then another. My shoes hitting the pavement, louder now, as if they were trying to drown out the steps behind me. I kept walking faster, faster. And then the voice came again. This time not from the phone, but from somewhere, someone behind me. Well, you can't escape me. I froze. The words were clear, as if the person were standing right there, just inches away. My heart hammered in my chest, and I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I turned quickly, my breath catching in my throat, but there was nothing. No one. Just the empty street. For a moment I stood there, frozen in place, my mind racing. Was this real? Or was it all in my head? The voice echoed in my mind, lingering, and the feeling of being watched grew even stronger. I knew I wasn't imagining it. Someone was out there. Someone knew everything about me. And they were following me. I didn't know who it was or why they were doing this. But I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't going to end until I found out who the shadow was. The person who knew every detail of my life and who was watching me, waiting for something. And I knew that whatever it was, I wasn't ready for it. I barely slept that night. I lay awake in my bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. The voice was still in my head, echoing like a haunting refrain, "You're being watched." It felt like the words were carved into the back of my skull, a constant reminder that someone was out there. Watching, waiting. I tried to convince myself that it was all just paranoia. Maybe it was the stress of work, the pressure of everything piling up. Maybe I just imagined the footsteps. But deep down I knew. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being hunted. The next morning I went to work as usual, trying to appear normal, trying to pretend like everything was fine. But the normalcy felt fake, as if the world had become a mask, hiding something darker beneath it. I couldn't stop looking over my shoulder. I couldn't shake the sensation of eyes on me, piercing through my every move. And the calls didn't stop. Every time my phone rang, my heart would leap into my throat. Each time the same voice, the same chilling message, "You're being watched." Sometimes the voice sounded closer, as though it were whispering directly into my ear, and other times it was distant, like the voice of someone standing just outside my window. I tried to block the number, but the calls kept coming from new ones. Always anonymous. Always with that same haunting message. Whoever this was, they were persistent. And they knew too much. The strange part was, the voice never made a direct threat. It didn't tell me what they were going to do to me. They never mentioned any intentions. It was just watching. always watching. The silence after the message hung in the air, heavier than words, like something was being unsaid, something that could turn dangerous at any moment. The more I tried to ignore it, the more it consumed me. By Wednesday, I could no longer stand it. I had to do something. I had to figure out who was behind this. But where could I even start? I couldn't go to the police. No one would believe me. Someone is watching me sounded insane. So I did what anyone would do when they were desperate. I started looking for signs. I retraced my steps from the previous night, walking the same route I had taken. I started in the city, where I'd felt the footsteps behind me, and walked down the empty street again. I was searching for anything out of place. A shadow that didn't belong. A figure that was too still. But the street was quiet. The same as always. I almost convinced myself that it had been my imagination. That I was just overreacting. But as I walked past the alleyway I'd passed the night before, I stopped. There it was, a slip of paper wedged between the bricks of a building. I crouched down to examine it, heart racing. It was a photograph, a grainy black and white picture of me. My breath caught in my throat. It was taken from across the street, at an angle where I couldn't have seen the person snapping the photo. But it wasn't the picture itself that terrified me. It was the note that had been scrawled on the back. I see you. I always will. I turned the photograph over in my hands, my fingers trembling. This couldn't be real. This wasn't real. But it was. The sickening realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Whoever was behind this had been following me. Not just the night before, not just on my walks, but for days, weeks, maybe longer. They had been there watching every move I made. How did they know so much about me? I didn't know how, but somehow I had become the prey. And the predator was out there, lurking in the shadows, just waiting for the right moment to strike. I stood up quickly, looking around, but no one was there. The street was empty, the same as it always had been. But this time the emptiness felt suffocating. The walls were closing in. The air was thick with fear, and I could feel it creeping into my chest, choking me. I had to get out of there. I needed to go somewhere safe. But where could I go? Who could I trust? I ran back to my apartment, slamming the door behind me. I locked every window, every door. I checked every corner of my small space, as though the walls might be hiding someone, waiting to jump out at me. And yet, no matter how many times I checked, I still couldn't shake the feeling that someone was there. Someone was watching me. I collapsed onto the couch, heart racing. I tried to calm myself, but my mind was spiraling out of control. The more I thought about it, the more I realized just how much this person knew. How much they had seen. I thought of all the little things, the moments I thought were private. The things I thought were mine and mine alone. But now nothing felt safe anymore. Not even the small space I called home. My phone buzzed. I hesitated before answering, knowing exactly who it would be. My hands were shaking as I pressed the screen. "Hello," I said, my voice barely a whisper. There was a long pause on the other end. My breath caught in my throat. My skin crawled with the feeling of being watched. Then the voice came again. "Don't worry," it said, slow and deliberate. "I'm not done with you yet." I wanted to scream, but the words caught in my throat. The phone line went silent. This time I didn't wait for the next call. I knew what I had to do. I wasn't going to wait around any longer for them to make the first move. I was going to find out who they were. And when I did, I wasn't going to let them get away. I couldn't stay in my apartment any longer. The walls, once a place of solace, had become my prison. The thought of staying here while someone was out there, watching me, was unbearable. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind, felt like a reminder that I was not alone. I needed answers. I needed to know who this person was and why they were doing this to me. But how? The police wouldn't take me seriously. How could they? No evidence, no lights, just a terrified woman claiming someone was watching her. I grabbed my coat, slipped on my shoes, and stepped out the door. The cool evening air hit me like a slap in the face, sharp and biting. It felt like a moment of clarity in all this chaos. I wasn't going to cower anymore. I was going to take control. I went straight to the one place that made sense, my old friend Mark. He was a journalist, sharp, resourceful, and always a bit paranoid, even for someone who made a living asking questions. I hoped he would be the person who could help me navigate this nightmare. The bar we used to frequent was quiet that evening, just a few patrons scattered at the bar and a couple of booths. I spotted Mark almost immediately, sitting alone in a corner with a drink in his hand. He looked up as I approached, his face softening when he saw me. "Lena," he said, standing up and giving me a quick hug. "It's been a while. What's going on?" I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I sat down, staring at him with wide eyes. "Mark, I need your help. Something happening to me. Someone's watching me." He didn't react with the skepticism I expected. Instead, his brow furrowed. "What do you mean? Are you sure?" I nodded. "Yes, I keep getting these calls anonymous." And then last night I found a photo of me. A picture of me taken from across the street. And there's a note on the back. "I see you. I always will." Mark's face went pale, but he didn't say anything. Instead, he reached into his bag, pulling out his phone. "Show me the picture," he said, his voice low. I dug into my pocket and handed him the photo. His fingers brushed against mine as he took it, a small jolt of static in the air. He looked at it carefully, his expression unreadable. After a long moment, he set it down on the table. "This is bad," Mark said quietly. "Whoever's doing this has been watching you for a while. They know how to stay out of sight, how to stay hidden. It's not just random." I swallowed hard. I know, and I don't know what to do. I can't just sit here and wait for them to do something. Mark leaned back in his seat, his fingers tapping rhythmically against the edge of his glass. "I don't think this is just some stalker. This feels like they're testing you. They want you to know they're out there, but they don't want you to know who they are. It's like they're playing a game." A cold shiver ran down my spine. The thought that this could be some twisted game made my blood run cold. "What kind of game?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Mark's eyes darkened. "I don't know, but I can help you figure it out. I know people who are good at this kind of thing. Let me look into it. Maybe we can find out who's behind this before it gets worse." I nodded, grateful for his support, but still, the unease gnawed at me. What if we couldn't find them in time? What if this person was always one step ahead? Mark stood up abruptly, his eyes scanning the room. "We can't talk about this here. It's not safe. Meet me at my place tomorrow night. I'll have some information." I hesitated, but then stood as well. I didn't have a choice. "Okay, tomorrow night." He gave me a tight smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Stay safe, Lina." The drive home was a blur. I couldn't focus on anything other than the chilling words echoing in my mind. "I see you. I always will." The person behind this had no intention of stopping. No matter where I went, no matter what I did, they would be there. I tried to shake off the feeling, tried to force myself to focus on something else. But every little sound made my skin crawl. The hum of the engine, the whisper of the wind against the car window, the distant buzz of a streetlight. All of it felt like someone was right there, just behind me, breathing down my neck. When I finally got home, I locked the door behind me and double-checked every window. I knew it wouldn't help, but it made me feel like I had at least some control over the situation. I didn't dare go to sleep. Every shadow in the corner of my eye felt like a threat. Every creak of the building sounded like someone was sneaking up on me. But it wasn't just fear that kept me awake, it was the unanswered questions. Who was this person? What did they want? And why me? I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was someone from my past, someone I'd crossed, someone with a vendetta. But the photo, they couldn't have just taken it. They had to have been watching me for a long time. They knew my schedule, my habits. And that terrified me more than anything. Around midnight, I finally gave in to exhaustion and collapsed onto the couch, my eyes fluttering closed. But even then, I couldn't escape the feeling of being watched. As sleep started to take me, I heard it again, the faintest sound. Footstep, slow, methodical. I froze. The sound was coming from outside the door. The footsteps grew louder. I could hear them clearly now, right outside my door. Slow, deliberate, as though the person was trying to make sure I could hear them. Every step made my heart race faster. My mind was spinning, trying to come up with some kind of logical explanation, but I couldn't. There was nothing logical about this. I pressed my back against the couch, eyes fixed on the door as if I could will the person to disappear. My breath caught in my throat as I heard the distinct sound of something metal, keys, perhaps, clinking against each other. It was followed by a soft scrape, as if someone was trying to turn the doorknob. I held my breath. The knob didn't turn. It couldn't have. The door was locked. But the sound of someone trying to get in, of someone waiting just outside, was too real. Too close. For a long moment, everything was still. The footsteps stopped. The door, which I had checked a dozen times, remained undisturbed. I was frozen, unable to move, unable to think clearly. My mind raced through every possible scenario, each more terrifying than the last. Was it the person who had been stalking me? Was this the moment they'd finally decided to confront me? The cold air from the hallway seemed to seep in under the door, causing a chill to run up my spine. I couldn't risk checking through the peephole. They'd know I was aware of them. They had to have seen me already, or worse, heard me. I glanced around the room. The shadows seemed darker now, as though the space itself was closing in on me. Every object in my apartment, the coffee table, the lamp, the curtains, became a potential hiding place for whatever was out there. My own breath felt too loud in the silence, echoing back at me like a warning. Then the sound came again. A soft knock. Not a hard, insistent knock, but gentle. Almost playful. I felt my pulse quicken in response, like my body was sensing something I couldn't yet fully comprehend. There was no question now. I had to get out. But how? The only exit was through that door, and whoever was out there was waiting for me to make a move. I took a step back, my eyes scanning the room, looking for any possible way out. The window. I had never considered escaping through the window before. It was too high up, too risky. But tonight, in the grip of panic, it felt like my only choice. The noise outside the door continued. A few more knocks. Then the unmistakable sound of someone dragging their feet across the floor, moving away from the door and into the hallway. My heart was pounding in my chest as I rushed toward the window. I threw the curtains aside, feeling a burst of relief when I saw the fire escape outside. Without wasting another second, I unlocked the window and pushed it open. The cold air rushed in, carrying with it the scent of rain and something metallic. I ignored it. There was no time to think. I climbed out onto the fire escape, the iron bars scraping against my fingers. I could hear my own breath, ragged and panicked, but I couldn't stop. I had to move. I slid down the metal steps as quickly as I could, not daring to look back. Every creak of the steps felt like a scream in the silence of the night. My heart was in my throat, and my legs burned from the effort of climbing down. I reached the bottom and darted into the alleyway, my feet pounding against the wet pavement as I ran. The world around me felt both too close and too far away at the same time. My mind screamed at me to keep running, but my body was starting to feel the toll of everything. The lack of sleep, the fear, the constant adrenaline. I reached the end of the alley and paused to catch my breath, trying to gather myself. For the first time in what felt like hours, I allowed myself to slow down, but only for a moment. Something felt wrong. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I turned slowly, scanning the street, and there, at the far end of the block, I saw a figure. A shadow standing still, watching me. It wasn't the first time I had seen this person. I could feel it in my bones. They had been the one following me, the one who had been outside my door. But now they were closer. Closer than ever. I squinted, trying to make out their face in the darkness, but it was too far away. Too blurry. I couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman. But I didn't need to. I knew who they were. Or rather, I knew what they were. Someone who knew too much about me. Someone who wanted something. My legs moved before my brain could catch up, and I sprinted toward the corner, trying to lose them. But when I turned the corner, there was nothing. No one. I slowed to a walk, my heart hammering in my chest. Was I imagining things now? Had I really seen someone there? Or was this just another trick my mind was playing on me? I pulled out my phone, my hands shaking as I tried to dial Mark. No answer. I tried again, but it went straight to voicemail. I couldn't stay out here any longer. I had to go somewhere safe. I needed answers. I needed someone who could help me figure out who this person was and why they were doing this to me. I turned on my heel and started walking again, this time toward Mark's apartment. Maybe he could help. Maybe he knew someone who could figure this out. I had to keep moving. As I walked through the empty streets, the feeling of being watched came back. It was stronger now, more intense than before. And just as I rounded another corner, I heard it. A soft, familiar voice. Lena. It was the voice from the phone. The sound of my name cut through the air like a knife. It was low, calm, almost too calm. My heart froze in my chest, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. My legs felt like they were made of lead, unwilling to carry me any further. The voice had come from behind me, yet I was afraid to turn around. I was afraid of what I might see. Lena, it came again, more insistent this time, but still smooth, almost reassuring. I couldn't understand how it sounded so familiar, yet so alien. I spun around. No one. The street behind me was empty, just the same empty stretch of pavement that I had passed only moments ago. I could still feel the chill of the night air, still hear the distant hum of the city, but there was no one there. My breath came in shallow gasps, my pulse thundering in my ears. I was losing my mind. I had to be. I glanced around quickly, searching for any signs of movement, any indication that someone had been there, anything to give me an explanation. But there was nothing. Just the silence. Just the darkness. The familiar hum of my phone buzzing in my pocket broke through my panicked thoughts. I pulled it out, my hands trembling, and saw the text message. I see you. I stared at the screen, my heart dropping into my stomach. It wasn't from Mark. It wasn't from anyone I knew. The number was unfamiliar. But somehow the message felt like it was meant for me, like someone had been waiting for this moment. I looked around again, trying to ignore the sick feeling rising in my chest. I knew they were here. I could feel their presence, close enough that it felt like they were standing right beside me. I tried to keep moving, but every step felt heavier than the last. The street was longer than I remembered, stretching out in front of me like an endless, empty expanse. It felt wrong, like the world itself was conspiring against me. I looked back down at my phone. You can't run forever, Lena. I recoiled, my hand shaking uncontrollably. I didn't know what to do, where to go. I felt like I was trapped in some kind of nightmare, and the more I struggled to wake up, the more real everything became. Another buzz. It's too late. The message sent a shock of cold terror down my spine. It felt like the walls were closing in, like the street itself was tightening around me, pressing in on all sides. I could hear my pulse pounding in my ears, but I could also hear something else. A faint shuffle of footsteps. They were behind me. They were getting closer. I whipped around, expecting to see someone there. But again, there was nothing. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to find shelter. I had to get out of the open, away from this madness. My mind raced, and then I remembered Mark's apartment. He lived only a few blocks away, and maybe, just maybe, he could help me figure out what was going on. Maybe he knew someone who could help me make sense of all of this. Without another thought, I turned and ran. My feet pounded the pavement as I tried to push myself faster, as if putting distance between myself and whatever, or whoever, was stalking me would somehow make this stop. But the footsteps behind me grew louder, matching my pace. I didn't dare look back. If I did, I knew I wouldn't be able to keep going. My breath was ragged, my body shaking with the exertion, but I forced myself to keep running, to keep moving forward. I turned another corner, desperate to reach Mark's place, but the sound of footsteps grew louder and louder, now more than just footsteps. They sounded like someone was chasing me, closing in. I could feel them. I could feel them right behind me, and I had no idea how to make it stop. Then as I reached the next intersection, I paused, heart racing. My eyes locked onto a figure standing across the street. They were far enough away that I couldn't make out any details, but I could feel the weight of their gaze, like they were watching my every move. I couldn't breathe. My legs wanted to give out beneath me. The figure didn't move, didn't speak. It just stood there waiting. I wanted to scream, to shout, to demand answers, but I couldn't make a sound. I could only stand frozen in place as the figure remained motionless, just staring. My mind raced, spinning in endless circles of confusion and terror. Who was that? Why were they doing this? Then the figure began to walk toward me. Slowly, deliberately. I couldn't move. My legs wouldn't obey me. My feet felt like they were glued to the ground. I knew I had to run, but something held me there, paralyzed. With every step, the figure got closer, and the feeling of dread in my chest intensified. It felt like everything around me was suffocating me, closing in. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, when I was sure I was going to break, the figure stopped. Right in front of me. And they spoke. I've been watching you, Lena. Their voice was familiar. Too familiar. I couldn't place it at first, but then it hit me. It was the same voice from the messages. The same voice from the phone. The one that had been calling me, watching me, controlling everything. And suddenly, the world felt like it was spinning out of control. Who are you? I finally managed to gasp, my voice barely more than a whisper. The figure took a step forward, and the light from the street lamp caught their face. I staggered back. It was Mark, but it couldn't be. It wasn't possible. Did you really think you could get away? He asked softly, a cold smile playing on his lips. And in that moment, everything I thought I knew, the world, my safety, my reality, crumbled into dust. You made it to the end of the stories. That means it's the perfect time to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. And if you haven't already, leave a like and drop a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have a great time relaxing, and good night.